I thought I'd start out by telling you why. You may wonder why I've been telling the same story for 28 years. That's how long I've been here. Actually, it's 24 years that I've told the story. So one time in chapel, after I'd been here for a few years, we had a speaker who had talked to our students about drugs and alcohol. And after the chapel, I heard some students talking in my classroom. And one of the girls said, "I'm really tired of people who had all their fun while they were young, and then they come to chapel and they tell us not to do all the things that they did." And it hit me. I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, there are four groups of people in the world. There are people who have never been involved with drugs and alcohol, and people probably wouldn't really listen to what they have to say. There are people who got involved but came out of it, and they want to tell you why you shouldn't do these things and the problems. There are people who got involved in that life and never came out of it, and they're a mess, so they can't come talk to you in chapel. And then there are people like my brother who got involved with drugs and alcohol and died. So I'm here to talk to you on behalf of that group of people who can't talk for themselves. So my brother's name was Andy, and he was 4 years younger than me. I do have a slideshow, so I'm going to just show you some things about our life. Keep in mind, these are very old pictures, and film pictures do lose something over the years. So they are not all the greatest of pictures. But we had a very normal family life. My dad was an alcoholic, and my mother divorced him when I was 4 and married my stepdad when I was 7. We did a lot of things that other families do. We camped, we had parties, we ate dinner together. My parents actually stopped drinking after they got married, so we never had alcohol in the house, and it seemed like a very unlikely place for this story to start. I used to chop my pictures for some reason because we didn't have the cropping abilities that we have now, so. As we were growing up, well, when we were young, Andy and I were close, but as we got to be teenagers, we were not close at all. I was a rule follower, a do the right thing kind of person, and he chose the opposite road. He had a rebellious spirit from an early age on, and he was very into dark music. He dressed like a thug, and we didn't like each other very much when we were teenagers. We were not close at all. That was a very good picture, but it hasn't aged well. The old acting excited when you get underwear for Christmas pictures. So as I got older, I got married, I moved away, went to college, and my mother and I would talk on the phone several times a week. And very often, our conversations were filled with her telling me of the phone calls from the police, from the jail, from hospitals, from Andy, from people who cared about Andy. She never knew what calls would come in the middle of the night because he was going downhill quickly. As I said, I got married. He was in my wedding. That was walking down the aisle. During that time, he wrote, I don't know if you'd really call it journaling. He wrote some things that were poems. He wrote some things that were just part of different treatment programs. He was in and out of all kinds of treatment programs. Sometimes he stayed in mental hospitals for a while. Basically, when you're an addict and you've been kicked out of your home for being a bad influence on your little brother, you go wherever there's a bed and a meal, and the meal is optional. Basically, all they want is drugs and somewhere to sleep. So he started writing some things, and I'm going to read you a lot of the things he wrote. I will say that for the sake of authenticity, I'm reading the words as he wrote them, so these are his words, not mine. The first one is called Problems Alcohol Caused Me. I've been fined for underage drinking 6 times. I've been convicted of drinking and driving. I wrecked and totaled my car, which led to my inability to afford insurance. I've lost the respect that my parents had for me. I've lost self-respect. I almost lost my job as a manager at Napa Auto Parts. I lost respect that my little brother had for me. I've hurt my girlfriend many times. Alcohol has put me over $3,000 in debt since I was 14. Alcohol also caused me to lose respect for God. This is another that he wrote, and he titled this one, Reflections. Just a carefree kid out running wild, my thoughts of the future often shattered by things of the present that didn't matter. As I grew older, my ways were the same. I had the idea life's only a game. So to win, I cheated, but instead I lost. And as a loser, I'm paying the cost. But as I think of these thoughts in the night and begin to see that my past wasn't right, I plan for a future that I hope will be a way of life to satisfy me. Some of these I have dates, so I'm kind of going to start you on a timeline through about the last 7 months of his life. So this was written on July 5th, 1989, and it's called Thoughts from Jail. Life so full of dreams and scenes, so damn disgusting, so it seems. It gets me sick and turns my gut. Here I sit in the same old rut. There could have been another way to be so free to run and play, but this is the way I choose, and I'm not going to change or rearrange, and I ain't never going to lose. I sit and think so many times of the fun I've had committing my crimes and the price I paid just to have fun and the times I ended up hurting someone. How can I only be 21 and had myself so much fun? These are the things I often wonder as the thoughts go through my brain like thunder. So that was July 5th. This is July 14th. These are excerpts from a letter that he wrote me. He says, I'm back at Woodville now, which that's one of the mental hospitals where he sometimes stayed. I took off last Friday and sadly turned myself into the state police on Monday. I lost my ground card and have to stay inside for 10 days and start from square one. I found out a few things I've been wanting to find out while I was out for the weekend. First of all, I got in touch with Roxanne's mother, and it turns out that Roxanne had our baby on June 17th. It was a healthy baby girl. I don't even know what its birth weight was or what she named it. She put the innocent little girl up for adoption. I don't know how she could have done this. The other thing I found out is that I can go to work as soon as I get out. A friend's boss said he would hire me when I get discharged. I really want to go back to work. Sitting here with all this time just eats away at me. I could be working on riverboats and staying out on the river for 2 to 5 weeks at a time. It sounds like the kind of job I need. The only thing is I have to call my probation officer and see about the time I'll have to serve. I've been feeling pretty confident about myself lately, and I know where I stand with Roxanne, and I know it's all over now. I have to pick up my head, pick up the pieces, and start building my life. I want to have what I had before and even more. I have some really good friends from my stay at McKeesport Hospital, and they've helped me out a lot. I love you both and appreciate your support and help. So that was July 14th. August 24th. Here I sit again, behind the bars I'm held within. Now I have no one but myself as I'm hanging on the edge of a shelf. I can work hard and climb back up or fall back into the rut. I need God's strength and power to rain down on me like a shower. Better days are yet to come. I know someday I'll see the sun. I want to have a life someday. The time has come to quit running away. I'll pay my price for what I've done and quit asking why I'm the one. I end this poem in painful tears by thanking God my parents still care. And then this is another letter that he wrote to me at the beginning of September. I'm locked up again for 14 days this time. Last week on Friday, I had a 12-hour pass, and I went down to the regatta in Pittsburgh. I met up with a guy I graduated with. It turned out he has his own yacht, and I went out on it with him. There was a giant party, and I wound up drunk. I came back the next day, and they postponed my discharge. I was supposed to get out of here on August 11th, but it looks like I'll be here until September. I talked to Mom last night and found out that Roxanne didn't put our baby up for adoption. That really made me happy and gives me something to work for and look forward to. I've been doing a lot of hard praying lately, and God seems to be helping me get through some really tough times. I just hope I can continue to stay on the right track this time. I'm really getting discouraged and disgusted with the way I've been living. Every time I go back to drinking, it gets worse. I have less fun. I'm finally believing that it's only fun in the beginning. I have a couple of friends up here with me that are Christians, and we have prayer meetings together. Please write soon. So that was September. During the last year and a half or so of his life, Andy got very interested in building relationships with family that he either never had or had destroyed over the years. And he got very interested in having a relationship with the Lord, which we were raised in church, but he obviously had walked away from the Lord. So during that time was when we started writing letters. We were talking on the phone, and we really had not done that in years because of the way he was living. So he was trying to do damage control and build relationships. We were living in Tennessee at the time. My family's in Pennsylvania. We were living in Tennessee at the time, and my husband is a praying man. If there's a prayer meeting at a church at 6 a.m. and there are only 2 people there, one of them will be my husband. And at that time, he was praying every week at our church with a man named Jim. And Jim never met my brother, but he took a very heartfelt interest in Andy, and he prayed for Andy all the time. So keep Jim in your mind because he will come back later in the story. In October, Andy got into a 30-day inpatient rehab, which is what we've always thought he needed. The little 1-week deals didn't do much for him. But we thought if he could be clean for a month, that might do it. So he checked himself into an addiction treatment center at a hospital. And at the time, I was teaching out in Seymour at King's Academy, which used to be called Harrison Chohawi Baptist Academy. I was teaching 8th and 9th graders, which those of you who know me might find interesting, me with 8th graders. Anyway, but one day during class, I took about 15 minutes, and I just asked my students if they would write my brother letters, because I thought if he's going to be locked up it was a locked up ward, but he checked himself in. I thought if he's going to be locked up for 30 days, getting mail would probably make him happy. So I asked my students to just take a few minutes one day and write him letters. And I knew that a lot of my students had come from families that had problems. So anyway, they wrote, they sealed their letters. I put the postage on, and I mailed one every day. And I never read the letters. But part of what Andy had to do while he was at his inpatient care was write what is called his chemical history, which means he had, to the best of his ability, he had to piece together his story, how he got where he was. So I'm going to read it. It's a little bit long. I'm taking some parts out, but please try to pay attention. He started out by writing this first page to the students who had written him the letters, but I'm going to ask you to take it as if it is written to you. Dear friends, I really appreciate each and every one of you for taking time from your life and problems to pray for me and write me letters. I want you to know I thank God for all of you every night and pray that He will be with you. I hope you'll have a better understanding of what I've been through with the enclosed chemical history about myself. I also hope it will show you how quickly you can screw up your whole life. Most of you are about the age I was when I went into this terrible stage of life. Please listen. Love, your friend, Andy. I was born on September 20th, 1967. My mother divorced my father when I was 3 months old. I have an older sister, and we went to live with my grandparents. My mother met a man and married him when I was 4 years old. He was a good father. He cared for us and loved us. I had a pretty good childhood. My mother got pregnant and had my little brother when I was 12 years old. This is when things started to change. My older sister never got in trouble. My little brother was the center of attention, which is normal. I felt like I really didn't have a place to fit in the family. At the age of 14, I had my first drink, which was a half a pint of black velvet that me and a friend stole out of his father's liquor cabinet. I loved it because I could escape my problems, feel more comfortable, impress other kids, and I just liked the fact that I knew it was wrong. This went on for some time and progressively turned into every weekend. By the time I was 16, I was drinking 3 or 4 times a week. I got my first underage drinking fine around this time. My parents grounded me every time I came home with alcohol on my breath. This just gave me the opportunity to try smoking weed. So now I was drinking when I knew I could get away with it and smoking weed when I would have to face my parents. By the time I turned 17, I had been busted 3 times for underage drinking and was tired of being grounded. So I became a heavy weed smoker and just about shut the alcohol out. When I turned 18, I had freedom, a car, a good job, and money to blow. So this began my drinking again and smoking, and now I tried my first line of cocaine. I loved it. I didn't try cocaine again until about 6 months later when I met this special girl in my life, and I wanted her to have this great feeling also. The first time we did it together, we promised each other we would never do it when we were apart. Well, I blew that one. I started getting it every weekend and doing a little bit with her, and when we went to the motel, then I would save the rest for me. Life was going great. I had a car, a job, money, freedom, booze, weed, coke, and a beautiful girl to enjoy it with. When I hit 19, I noticed I was starting to black out, but I figured, what the hell, it's worth it. So from here out, this might not fit together that well. By this time, most of my nights were spent drinking a fifth of Wild Turkey while driving around with 1 or 2 of my buddies until I had to pick Roxanne up from work. This went on every night for about 6 months. About this time, I said, hey, enough of these blackouts, so I slowed down on the whiskey and started drinking a lot more beer. In January of 1988, me and Rox got in an argument, and I hit her for lying to me. I was drunk out of my mind, so I went to the liquor store and got a fifth of Wild Turkey, and me and a buddy went to a motel to start on a binge. The next day, I got my first DUI. This didn't change anything. I got back with my girlfriend and continued to party. I was told to find a place of my own in February 1988, and I did so. I moved in with an older man I worked with, and I lived there a month before he kicked me out. I couldn't blame him. This is when I got really into cocaine. I moved to a second-floor apartment with a friend of mine. It was great. I had a party every night, whether I knew it or not. Everyone I knew just said, let's go over Andy's and party. I never turned them down. This went on until summer, with the police being there several times a week because of the noise and fights. By this time, me and Rox were living together. After about 3 weeks of being drunk and blacked out all the time, me and Rox were physically abusing each other, as well as verbal abuse. I ended up having a party one night, and there was a big fight. The drop ceiling was ripped down, 2 doors were ripped off the hinges, and there were numerous holes in the walls. So on to another apartment. This time I didn't care where it was, just so I could have a place to party and keep my belongings. So I moved into a one-room apartment with Roxanne and a friend. This was a big downfall for me because I quit my job while I was on a 2-week binge. One day I had a party at the apartment. There was a lady across the street staring up at my window. I made some remarks to her, and a buddy of mine pulled his shorts down in front of the window. The lady screamed she was going to call the police, so we took off for the bar. When I arrived back at the apartment that evening, I was arrested for indecent exposure. I went down to the police station, and the chief said they didn't have any evidence it was me, so they took me back home, and I thanked the cop for the scenic ride. He didn't like that. Exactly 1 week later, the same cop came back to my apartment with a warrant. I was stoned out of my mind, and I hit 2 of the cops. They beat me until I was black and blue and sprayed me with mace. I was blinded and burning for at least 4 hours in the holding cell. From there, I went to the county jail with a $5,000 straight bail. I spent a week in there in the mental ward with constant lockup before my stepfather put up bail. When I got out, I was clean for about 2 weeks, and then my stepfather got me a good job, and I got another apartment with my girlfriend. Things were starting to look better for us. Back to the same thing all over again. I had a lot more money now to buy cocaine and booze. Me and Rox were back to physical and verbal abuse, but it was almost always me doing it. In December of '88, I was sitting in a bar, and my real dad walked in. I was blown away. I hadn't seen him for about 5 years. He looked at me, and I motioned for him to come over to where I was sitting. He said, "Blank you, come over here." He didn't even know who I was until I told him. Well, it didn't bother me much because I was half stoned. We decided to go to another bar and shoot pool and finish getting drunk. Around the middle of December, I was on a binge, and I set up a cocaine deal. Me and 3 of my buddies went out to the car. My 2 good buddies were in the front, and I was in the back with the guy that wanted to buy the ounce. I pulled the ounce out, and the guy next to me pulled a gun out and put it to my head. I said, "What the hell is going on?" And the next thing I knew, the guy in the front turned around and hit him with a club and knocked his head through the rear window. Well, I got my money and got the hell out of there. You'd think by now I would have learned. The next day, I went out and got some cocaine and met up with a friend of mine that knew how to mainline. If you don't know what that is, it's injecting it into your veins. It didn't have a great effect on me because I already had about 1/2 of a 1/5 in me already. The second week of January, I came home drunk out of my head and told Rox she could use my car to go to her mother's house. Then I passed out. When I woke up, I didn't know where Rox was, and I didn't know where my car was. I thought she left me. I had 900 milligrams of Demerol and 1,500 milligrams of caffeine, so I took them all and hoped for a peaceful ending. I left the apartment and went to the bar and started drinking. The only problem was that after every beer, I had to run outside and puke it back up. Rox came back home that night, and there was more physical abuse. I laid in my bed and shook and sweated and puked for 3 days. 1 week later, January 20th, was her mother's wedding. The night before, I went out and sold my $400 stereo for 1 gram of cocaine. The day of the wedding, I smoked 1/2 gram and had been drinking for about 20 hours. When we got to the reception, I started drinking whiskey. About 1/2 a bottle later, I was fighting with anyone I could see, which was pretty rough because I was half blind at this time. Well, it ends up I got in a fight outside with a guy who got into one of the limos that were rented, and I punched 2 of the windows out and embedded glass in his face. I was a maniac. I didn't know what I was doing. In fact, I ended up at my apartment that night and came to in the morning and wondered what happened. I called my girlfriend's mother to see where she was, and her mother told me what I had done and that she had the whole thing on video. I went out to drink my hangover away and called off work. The next day it hit me like a sledgehammer, but I made it to work that night. I came home from work, walked in the door. I thought I was in hell. I couldn't bear the guilt, remorse, or pain of what I had done. I was scared to death of my apartment without rocks there, and I felt like killing myself. I lost my mind and ran out of the apartment. I went to work for the rest of the week, but I couldn't go back to my apartment because I was scared of it. So I rode around in my car until Thursday, when I went over to my mother's and told her what I had done. I made an appointment to come here the following Tuesday. I stayed at my mother's house for the following days. Sunday night, I went out and drank a pint of Jim Beam and half a case of beer. After doing this, I picked up a girl I knew from Alcoholics Anonymous. We went for a ride to my friend's house to get some cocaine. When I came out of his house and got in the car to leave, the car wouldn't go in reverse. I figured, hell, I'll just drive up on the sidewalk and turn around. I was arrested for my second DUI and taken to the county jail again. Now I'm in jail with $1,000 straight bail, and I was already out on a $5,000 bail. I looked at myself. I lost rocks, my baby, 7 cars, my friends, my job, and over $6,000 in fines from alcohol and drugs. This is it. You can't get any deeper in the hole. Fortunately, my stepfather bailed me out of jail, held my job, and drove me here. So that was October. That Christmas was a very special Christmas for us. My husband and I went back up to Pennsylvania for Christmas. I was pregnant with my daughter and having horrible, horrible morning sickness that lasted all day long. So I stayed with my mother. My husband stayed with his family, which was about 25 minutes away. During that period of time, Andy was staying at my mother's during the week and going back to his apartment just on the weekends. So he was holding down a job. He wasn't using anything during the week. And that Christmas, we couldn't have imagined a more perfect Christmas other than the whole morning sickness thing. But my little brother was 11, and the 3 of us did a lot of things together. We walked in the snow, we played with the dog, we played board games, we built fires, we drank hot chocolate, all things that we had never done before because of just the dynamics of what was going on with Andy. So that was, it was just an amazing Christmas. And my mother, this is one of my favorite pictures of Andy because of the look on his face. He does not look tormented there. He looks peaceful. So that's his daughter. That was the one time that he got to see her. We had her for a few hours one of the days that I was up there, and that's our little brother, Brandon. I love those pictures too. So when our week was over and we were getting ready to say our goodbyes, Andy and I were standing at my mother's front door. He was wearing a white strap t-shirt, as he had on in that picture. He had on jeans. He had a chain hanging from his pocket. He had on black leather boots, and that was kind of his uniform. And we were standing at the front door, and I said, well, it's been really nice sharing Christmas with you. I said, I still don't know if I could ever live with you again, but it was nice sharing Christmas with you. And he said, yeah, Lise, I know what you mean. And we hugged, which we had never done before. And we walked out the door and came back to Tennessee. I went back to teaching, so that was the very beginning of January. February 22nd, I was in my classroom at King's Academy. It was about 5 after 3. I was teaching a lesson on electricity, and I got a phone call. We had phones in our room that went to the outside world, and the receptionist said that my mother was on the phone. So I pulled the phone cord and went out into the hall. And I said, "Mom," and she just gasped. And I said, "Mom," and she was making sounds, but she wasn't saying anything. And I said, "Is it Andy?" And she just kept making sounds. And I said, "Is he dead?" And she said, "Yes." And I felt that concrete wall slap me in the back, and my knees gave out, and I slid down that ice-cold wall to the floor. And I was 4.5 months pregnant at that time, and my whole stomach went into violent convulsions. I could just feel my baby just, I was so afraid I was going to lose her, just violent spasms. And I thought, I have to go back in that room and tell those sweet kids who wrote all those letters to my brother and who have been praying for him for months that he's dead. And I knew I couldn't fall apart at that moment, so I went back in and I told them very quickly, and I grabbed my stuff and I left. My husband and I had to make the 500-mile, close to a 9-hour trip to Pennsylvania. And the whole time, I just kept thinking, where's Andy? That was the overwhelming, I just kept thinking, where is he? And so when we didn't get until about 2 a.m, and I crashed. I was so tired. But my husband didn't. My husband, and before we left Tennessee, my husband had called Jim and told Jim that Andy died. So my husband, when we got there, went downstairs and prayed. He stayed up all night and prayed. And early the next morning, he woke me up at about 5, and he said, "I've been praying all night." He said, "And I just called Jim because I figured he was praying all night." He said, "Jim told me," this was my husband saying, "Jim told me that the Lord just told him that Andy is with him in heaven." And my husband said, "The Lord told me the same thing at the very same time, that Andy was with him." And for me, that made it a whole lot easier. I was just able to see things differently, knowing that Andy was with the Lord and wasn't living in torment anymore. It is worth noting that at the end of his life, those last few months when he was trying to get clean and when he was holding down a job, he had gotten off of heroin, he was off of cocaine, he wasn't drinking liquor anymore. All he was drinking was beer. So when people say things about just beer just puts a knife through my heart, because just beer took my brother's life. So don't ever fool yourself into thinking that beer deserves a just in front of it, because it doesn't. So at the funeral home, there were 2 people in particular that stood out to me. You know, at a funeral home, there's a long line of people waiting to come up and hug you and cry with you and tell you things they remember. And there was a dirty man. He had on work clothes. He wasn't dressed like most people were dressed, and he stood in line for a long time. And when he finally got up to the front, I was the one he talked to. And he said, "I'm a truck driver." He said, "I've been delivering auto parts to Napa, where Andy worked off and on for years." He said, "I've known Andy for a couple years." He said, "And I hadn't seen him for a while, but a few weeks ago," he said, "I was driving down the road and I saw him walking," because Andy lost his license all the time and wrecked his cars all the time, so he spent a lot of time walking, even along highways. And he said, "I saw him and I pulled up behind him." And he said, "When Andy turned around, I almost didn't recognize him." He said his face had a look that I'd never seen on him before. He said he had a peaceful, joyful look on his face. And he said, "I knew something was different." He said, "I just thought you might want to know that." And after he left, so I mean, just turned around, and a moment later, my mother said, "Who was that?" And I told her, and we went to run and go find him because my mother wanted to talk to him, and we couldn't find him anywhere. I mean, it was like he was gone in a blink. So I don't know, but I know God sends us things that he knows we need. The other thing I remember is my brother's roommate, who he shared his apartment with on the weekends, stood in line. And when he got up to the front, he handed us this plastic cage with a rodent in it, a little white mouse. And he said, Andy bought this a couple weeks ago. He said, when I asked him why he bought it, he told me he wanted something to take care of. He wanted something that needed him. And he said, I just thought you might like to have it. So Brandon, who was 11 then, got to have that mouse for a couple years, and it brought him joy. So we were thankful for that. My husband wrote and delivered the eulogy at Andy's funeral. So I'm going to read you a little bit of that. He said, I really liked Andy a lot. He was a nice guy. It was no secret, and Andy would humbly admit he was addicted to alcohol. For this reason, people who knew him well would say there were two Andys. I really only knew one, and that's the one I'll talk about. 2 months ago, he and I hiked to a place at Lynn Run State Park known as 90-Foot Rock. It's an outcropping of rocks high on a hill from which you can see a long way. We spent over a half hour there, mostly just enjoying the quiet. He would look in the distance, look for deer, mostly just look relaxed. He told me how those times really cleared his mind and helped him to think. We talked about a lot of different things. I remember asking if he had a problem with knowing God loves him. He said that when he looked at all the ways God helped him, he knew God loved him. A bit later in the hike, I told him, you may think this is stupid, but I hugged him and told him I loved him. After hugging me, he said, I don't think that's stupid. I've learned that we need that. I really liked Andy a lot. He was a nice guy. But Andy did have a problem with alcohol. Just before we visited him this past Christmas, he screwed up. I asked how he was doing. He said, not too good, Tom, and I really want you to pray over me. We prayed earnestly and talked a lot. He told me he wanted to beat this habit worse than anything in the world, and then he said he didn't blame anyone for not believing him. I told him I believed him. I asked if it was tough staying away from the alcohol. Tom, it's been really tough. It was really bad last night. I asked what happened. He said, I prayed a lot, and it went away some, and then I was able to sleep. I really liked Andy a lot. Over the past 2 months, I've not seen him yet. Those who have, his family, and even some people who didn't know him well, noticed a real change, a real turnaround in his life. Yet I suppose if you added up all the good things he did over the past several years and tried to balance them against the bad would win. Jesus was put to death on the cross with two criminals. One of them admitted he deserved to be killed for his crimes, yet he earnestly called out to Jesus, dying beside him, Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And Jesus said to him, truly I say to you, today you shall be with me in paradise. Likewise, God does not look at Andy as someone who screwed up a lot. God looks at him now, even face to face, as a person who earnestly called out to Jesus and was heard. So the police did not know exactly how Andy died. His body was found next to a river in the early morning by some kids who were skipping school to go fishing. So because they didn't know, and he had a big lump on his head and a cut, and there was some blood. So they didn't know. So basically they treated it like a murder investigation. They had to do toxicology reports. They had to do an autopsy and investigation, and they wouldn't say anything until they had completed the whole investigation, which took about a month. So for a month, we didn't know if he was murdered or if he died from whatever was in his system. So I'm going to show you the ugliest thing that I own. I hate to look at it and I hate to touch it, and I know that you won't all be able to see it, so I have a slide. This is the bag that the morgue gave my stepdad with what Andy had in his possession when he was found. He had a chain around his neck that kind of looked like a bullet, and he had a dime in his pocket. That's what he had. So when we went to clean out his apartment, we had very little to clean out because he sold everything for drugs and alcohol. He had very, very few possessions. But when we were cleaning out the top drawer of his dresser, we found something that mattered to him a whole bunch. We found all the letters that those kids had written him, and I did finally get to read them. And we also found all the cards and letters that my mother and my grandmother and my husband had sent to him over the years, which I didn't bring because there were just too many and my hands were shaking, so I was afraid I would drop them. But I'm still friends on Facebook with a lot of these people who are now 50, because I was young when I was their teacher. But these letters mean the world to me. Another thing that we found a lot of in Andy's apartment was he had things with the Footprints in the Sand poem. He had things on his wall. He had just all kinds of cards. So that poem meant a lot to him. So I'm actually going to play a video that will read it.
One night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me, so I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why. When I needed you the most, you would leave me. He whispered, "My precious child, I love you and will never leave you, never, ever during your trials and testing. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you."
So I said that the police were doing a murder investigation, and it was about a month before we heard anything. And then they called my mother and told her that they had pieced together what they believed happened. And basically there was a bar across the street. Andy had bought a case. He drank over half of it, but if you've been listening, he had done that before, so apparently that was not a lethal dose for him. But it was a cold night in February in Pennsylvania. So after he was drunk, he carried the case across the street with him. He loved nature. He loved to just sit in nature and think. And he went down a muddy embankment, and he probably fell and hit his head on a rock, which is what caused the big bump and the gash. And then they think that he went over to the water to wash the blood away, and probably bent over, got dizzy, fell backwards, and he fell with his feet in the river in February in Pennsylvania. And throughout the night, he died of hypothermia because he was too drunk to wake up and know that he was cold. So when my mother asked the police, "How do you know he wasn't murdered?" the police officer said, "Ma'am, there was only one set of footprints. God gives us what we need." Let me pray. Lord, I thank you. I thank you for how well these students have listened. I thank you for helping me to do this, because it certainly isn't easy. I pray, Lord, that you would touch hearts. I pray that people who need freedom would seek help, that people would see that there is no glory in this life, that it's very easy to start dipping your toes into this stuff and maybe even to dive into it. But at some point, a lot of people end up realizing that they're drowning and they don't know how to get out. So Lord, I pray for every person here, whether it's them or someone that they care about. I pray that you would touch hearts, that you would give people courage to not ignore this message. I pray that you would prepare us for the second part on Thursday, and just that anyone who needs to talk would find a counselor or a teacher or a parent and start the conversations that need to be had, because everybody here knows that drugs and alcohol go on everywhere, even at Christian schools. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would be glorified in all that happens here. In your name, amen. I really do appreciate that you're willing to sit through 2 chapels in 1 week. I know that's asking a lot, but I really can't tell the whole story and all that I think God wants me to say in just 1 chapel, so I really do appreciate it. So I thought I would start today by following up with a little bit. My students in class were asking me some questions on Tuesday, and there was a whole lot of interest about Cassie in particular. So I'm kind of going to tell you the end of the story, and then we'll talk about some other things. So one of the reasons, well, 2 of the reasons that Andy so desperately wanted to be free are in the picture with him. And I know I showed this the other day, but it's one of my favorites because I think his face is absolutely beautiful. His daughter and our little brother Brandon, and I told you that Brandon was exposed to a lot of things that a 10-year-old should not be exposed to because he was living in the house. I wasn't living there when the worst of this was going on. Shortly after Andy died, Brandon wrote this. I remember Andy would take me down in the woods. We would go way down in the woods and talk. He used to tell me that he was sorry he wasn't around to be my brother, but he'd like to make it up to me. I know he would have liked to be my brother again because he was really looking forward to going hunting with me this year. Brandon is now 45, and he started out as a policeman. He actually had some criminals knock him down with a car and partially run over him, and he had some shoulder injuries that he never recovered from, so he decided to go to law school. So he now is a partner in his own small law firm in Pittsburgh, and just got engaged for the first time New Year's Eve. So Brandon's doing well. Cassie, my mom would keep in touch with Roxanne, and a couple times a year would get Cassie to come over for visits. She took Cassie to church when she was little. Cassie grew up to be a very beautiful young lady. Unfortunately, even though she never knew her father, she followed in his footsteps and spent way too many years of her life involved in addiction of drugs and alcohol. She and Roxanne, her mom, actually spent years living on the streets together, living the addict life together, because Roxanne never got free. Roxanne's in her 50s now, and she has been an addict ever since she was a teenager. Roxanne has 4 children, none of whom are in relationship with her because she has stolen from them and hurt them all so many times. so her kids have paid the price for her addiction. So we lost track of Cassie for a couple of years, and all of these people live in Pennsylvania. We lost track of Cassie for a couple of years when she was living on the streets and involved in theft and whatever she had to do to get money to buy drugs. And so that was a hard time for us. We lost her for probably 4 years, heard nothing, which was extremely stressful for my mom. 8 years ago, when I was doing this chapel, well, Cassie and I were Facebook friends, and she saw that I put up on Facebook asking people to pray because I was getting ready to do this chapel. And she reached out to me and asked me how she could watch it. So she was able to live stream it and watch it. And she learned a whole lot about her dad, and she learned a whole lot about her mother that she never knew growing up. And I came into school the next day after that chapel, and she had posted this on my Facebook. She put her picture next to her father's picture with the broken heart. And I wonder about you every day. So Cassie told us a short time after that she was pregnant, and she was trying to get clean because she was pregnant. So there's a picture of Andy's daughter and Andy's granddaughter, Skyla, and they call her Sky. And she's a little cutie. She's now 4 years old and has dreamy eyes, and she knows how to use them. We just saw her over spring break. We were having a birthday party for my mom, and Cassie and her 3 siblings, who all consider my mother their grandma, even though we're not biologically related to the other 3. They're part of our family. And Skyla was the entertainment at the party. She melted everybody's heart. So next I'd like to talk to you just about some things that God showed us as we were going through all of this, some things that we learned. First one is small things can matter more than you'll ever know. And what I mean by that is if God puts it on your heart to say something to somebody or to write someone a note or to open a door or whatever, to do something that might seem small and you might feel uncomfortable and you might feel stupid, but you think God wants you to do it, please do it. You have no idea how badly the person on the receiving end might need that and that it could make a difference in their life. So of course the picture of the mouse, that's exactly what the little mouse looked like, that young man stood in line at the funeral home for over an hour to hand us that mouse. He probably felt stupid, who takes a mouse to a funeral home, but he did it. And as I said on Tuesday, Brandon was able to raise that mouse for a couple of years, and it brought him great comfort. In addition, it helped us to know that Andy wanted to love and take care of something. He wanted to live. He wanted a future desperately. You don't go out and buy a pet if you want to die. The picture at the bottom, those are the letters that my students had written that I showed you on Tuesday. And again, the writing of those letters was optional. I didn't tell them they had to do that. I gave them 15 minutes in class one day. They could have slept, they could have finished homework, but they took time, they wrote Bible verses, they wrote encouragement to a guy older than them who they didn't know, had never met. All they knew was that he was in trouble and he needed encouragement, and they did. They said what God told them to say, and those were priceless, and I think Andy read them many times. The monster truck was, my stepdad had bought tickets to take Brandon to the monster truck rally in Pittsburgh, and he had bought them, of course, before Andy died. So on the night that we were all at the funeral home, that was the night that was going to be the monster truck rally. And again, Brandon was 10 or 11 and had been around crying people for days. I mean, really crying people for days. And my husband's the hero of a lot of my stories. My husband volunteered to take Brandon down to that monster truck rally, and my husband did not feel like going to a monster truck rally. He wanted to be with me. I was pregnant and going through all of this stress. It was horrible weather. The newscasters were saying, don't go out on the road, stay home, everything's icy, it's treacherous. And my husband drove over 30 minutes to take my brother to a monster truck rally because he thought this would be a good thing for this kid who's going through so much right now. Every year, every February, those commercials come on TV in Pittsburgh, that same monster truck rally. My mother calls me in tears every year and says, thank your husband for being willing to sit through a horrible monster truck rally, which is what girls generally think of monster truck rallies. But she calls every single year because it meant so much to her that he was willing to do that. So don't ever ignore those quiet whispers that God puts in your heart to do something for somebody, because you have no idea what it can mean. The next thing I want to talk about is I think that a lot of times God gives us a chance to learn lessons the easy way before we have to learn them the hard way. And unfortunately, human nature, and especially adolescent human nature, is that we don't want people telling us what to do. We think we know, and we've got it. We can figure it out on our own. Andy totaled 7 cars, and he still kept drinking and driving. He had so many close calls. If you think back to the story, he had a gun held to his head in the back seat of a car during a cocaine deal. He was rescued so many times from things that should have killed him or could have killed him, and he just kept going back to that lifestyle, which hopefully you realize was not a willful thing. Once addiction has enough of a grab on you, you lose the power to say no more. So unless the Lord delivers you and you use that as your source of power, it's very, very difficult to get out of a life of addiction. I think a lot of times we're given the examples of other people, just as you are being given this week, that we can learn life's lessons the easy way by seeing what has happened to other people rather than having to go through everything ourselves. Sadly, my brother's best friends, who were the pallbearers at his funeral, they carried his casket, and they were talking about how they were going out to get drunk that night. So you can choose to learn life's lessons the easy way or the hard way. The sad thing is, when you do it the hard way, your family suffers with you and your friends suffer with you, and it doesn't go away. So even though we went through so much pain, God did a lot of things to soften the blow. And a lot of this is going to be a quick recap of some things I've already said. But God gave us the things we really needed. For one, I told you that Andy and I had never had a close relationship as teenagers, and the last year and a half of his life was beautiful. He restored relationships with my husband and me. He restored relationships with our parents. He just was interested in loving people and being loved by people and not hiding anymore, and sharing his struggles with people, asking God for help, going to church, praying with other people. So those were tremendous gifts. It would have been so much harder if he had died the way that our relationship was a few years earlier. I know I keep going back to that pitiful little mouse, but that was a sign to us that he wanted to live. He wanted something to love and care for. The truck driver that I said, who stood in line for an hour at the funeral home, he was dirty. I think he was coming straight from work, came to tell us that when Andy turned around on the highway the last time he saw him, the look on his face was different. Again, God gave us that. He didn't have to give us that. Little piece of knowledge brought us so much comfort that a virtual stranger saw a difference in him the last few months of his life. The answer that God gave to Tom, my husband, and Jim that morning after they prayed all night, telling two men 500 miles apart that Andy was with him, oh my goodness, what a gift. I just can't even tell you how amazing that was. The footprints, how I ended on Tuesday, the fact that Andy loved that poem of footprints, and then what in the world are the chances that the police officer says it wasn't murder because there was only one set of footprints? So even though what we went through was horrible, God gave us so many blessings in the midst of it to make it easier to handle what we went through. We even got to the point where there were some things we were thankful for. We were thankful that although he totaled 7 cars, he never hurt or killed anybody. That's a gift. If he had, it would have destroyed him. It would have absolutely broken his heart if he had killed somebody else. I don't know that he could have lived with it. Another thing we were thankful for, when he had the bump and the gash on his head and went down to the water to wash the blood off, the normal way that you would think a person would fall, if they're bending forward to the water, you would think they would fall forward. If he had fallen forward, he probably would have been washed down the river, and we might have never known. He would have just disappeared off the face of the earth. But the police were able to piece it together, and thankfully he fell backwards. So somebody found him the next day. And there are people all over this country all over the world, who have had a loved one disappear and they never know what happens. I don't know how you live with that, but I thank you that God gave us an answer as far as what happened. My mother actually got to the point, it probably was a year or two later, but she actually got to the point where she said, I think Andy's young death may have been the most merciful thing God could do. Because if he would have been an addict all of his life, which our biological father was an alcoholic all of his life, she said if Andy had been an addict all of his life, he would have hurt the people he loved. He would have just constantly been hurting and disappointing people. And that would have killed him to do that, because every time he messed up, which is what he called it, it broke his heart because of what it did to the rest of us. So we actually got to the point that there were a lot of things that we were thankful for. I believe we saw this verse a week or two ago when Mr. Elliott was here. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So what I want to talk about for a little bit now, it's still tied to addiction, but it's going to get more broad than just addiction. I want to talk about some of the lies of the devil that we believe. The Bible tells us many times that the devil's full-time job is to torment us, to destroy us, to kill us, to lead us astray. And drugs and alcohol are one of the easiest ways for him to do that, because when you start down that path, it kind of takes care of itself. Once you become an addict, the devil doesn't have to keep leading you astray. The addiction continues to lead you astray. I'm assuming you all know this, but I'll just say it quickly in case anybody doesn't. But Satan was made to be an angel, to worship God. He is a created being of God. He's not equal with God. It's not like God's all the good and devil's all the bad and they're equal. The devil was created by God. He reached a point where he did not want to worship God. He wanted to be God. And that's why he was thrown out of heaven. The devil hates God, but he can't do anything to hurt God directly. The way that he hurts God is through us, because God loves us. So when the devil can get us to do things that are against God, that's how he gets his A pluses as far as getting back at God. It tells us in the Bible that the devil tried to tempt Jesus in the wilderness. If he would try to tempt Jesus, we're very naive if we think that he doesn't try to tempt us. He most certainly does. And he does it a lot of different ways. Alcohol and drugs is one of those ways. I'm going to flip through and quickly read some Bible verses. Pay attention to the parts that are underlined, because I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Submit therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you're unable to hear what I say. You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So see if any of these thoughts go through your mind. These are some of the lies that the devil tells us. Numb the pain. This is more than you can handle. Self-medicate. If you don't, people will think you're a coward. YOLO. The world's version of YOLO is a lie. YOLO means do whatever you want because you only get to go through here once. YOLO to Christians should mean we have one life to make as much impact for the Lord and the kingdom of heaven as we possibly can. What are you afraid of? People are going to laugh at you. Have fun while you're young. You can come to God when you're older. Problem is, you have no guarantee you'll see older. No one will know. You'll feel great. Just try it once. So maybe none of those are the things that you hear. Maybe you're not tempted by addiction. There are other things that the devil tries to lie to us about. Maybe you believe different lies that lead to things like anxiety, depression, perfectionism, which has the appearance of looking like a good thing, but it's a bondage. For many years, I dealt with two of those things I just named. I was a perfectionist in my younger days, and a big part of that was the rejection of our dad, because we only saw our dad twice a year growing up for an hour, and we had nothing to do with him in between. The rejection of our dad caused Andy tremendously low self-esteem, and he started self-medicating to kill the pain. For me, I kind of went the other way. I tried to be perfect because I always wanted my dad to think he was missing out on something by not being in my life. So I just tried to be all straight A's and look like I never did anything wrong, and I lived that life of hiding behind the mask of perfectionism. I also dealt with panic attacks horribly for some years. When I was in probably my 40s, it got really bad for a few years. I would be teaching and having panic attacks all day long. My students never knew it, but I was believing lies of the devil. A big lie. The devil used to tell me I was going to lose my mind someday because there was a lot of mental illness in my family, and I was scared to death of losing my mind. Especially thinking, what if I'm in the middle of teaching someday and I get up on the desk and start dancing? I was just scared to death of losing my mind. And those of you who deal with panic attacks or you have family members who deal with panic attacks, you know how horrible they are. Your throat closes, your hands sweat, you can't breathe, your chest hurts. I know, I lived through it horribly for about 8 years before the Lord set me on a path where he eventually freed me of that. But maybe some of these are the things that you hear, the things that cause you mental torment. You can't trust God. You're weak and helpless against whatever. For me, I felt very weak and helpless against my panic attacks. Your bad thoughts will never go away. You'll deal with this all your life. People won't like you if they know. Keep it a secret. Nobody will understand. If you aren't the best, you're nothing. Maybe those are the lies that cause you problems. Or you'll look like a bad Christian. What do you have to live for? Who will care if you're gone? The devil throws whatever lies he thinks will work, and he just throws them and throws them. It's kind of like the carnival game where you have balloons on the wall and you throw darts. He throws darts and hopes he can find a balloon that works for you, where he can pop your life and take control, and you surrender. And if the devil's lying to you and you're self-medicating, you make it that much easier. When Mr. Elliott was talking about the glasses, remember he talked about the glasses that made everything upside down, and then when the person took the glasses off, the brain had reworked itself and it was still seeing everything distorted? That's drugs and alcohol. And sometimes even if people do get clean, their thinking is cloudy. They never get that clarity back. So think about that. If you're drinking or using drugs, you may be doing damage to your brain in the name of having a good time for a few hours, and that damage may be irreversible. So the Bible says to resist the devil and he will flee. And I thought about this kind of in a new way this year, with us all having lived through COVID in our recent past. Think about when COVID started, and when it first got to Knoxville, and we started hearing the case count every day on the news. They would tell us how many people had COVID, how many people died from COVID. What did we do? There was something that we knew was a serious problem for some people. For other people, it wasn't a serious problem. It was like a cold. Problem was, you didn't know which one you were. You didn't know if you were one of those people who would get it and be fine a week later, or whether you were one of those people who would get it and be buried a week later. That's how drugs and alcohol are. Some people can drink and it never causes them a problem. Some people open that door and their home gets invaded and their life gets invaded and they never get it back. You don't know which one you are, but I can tell you this. I didn't want to stand up here and read you statistics because I don't think anybody likes to hear that. But when you start using as a teenager, the chances of you becoming an addict are through the roof compared to if you wait until you're older to drink. I'm not saying nobody should ever have a drink, but I'm saying teenagers, you need to stay away from this stuff. Your brains are still developing. You open that door, you think you know who's on the other side, and you may not have a clue who's on the other side. So if the Bible tells us to resist the devil and he will flee, we have a part in that. Resist is an action verb. The Bible doesn't say just pray and the devil will go away. Now make sure you're hearing me. Yes, we should pray, but we have an active part. And several of those verses that I read, the bolded things, told us to resist. Resisting is active. Resisting sounds like something's coming at you and you don't want it to come at you, so you're going to do something to stop it. That's what resisting is. The problem is And I never knew this when I was dealing with anxiety, and this is part of how God led me to freedom from that, was with the things I'm about to tell you. That we do have the power to resist, but it's not our power. It's the power of the Lord that allows us to resist the enemy. The Bible tells us no temptation has overtaken us except what is common to mankind. God is faithful. He won't let us be tempted beyond what we can bear. And when we're tempted, he will also provide a way out so that we can endure. And in Exodus, the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. And I spent some time trying to find a picture that would show kind of what my feelings were, the point that I was trying to make. So what I learned in my quest to be freed of anxiety was that we do need to resist the devil. When sick thoughts pop into your head, don't let them stay. We can't help what pops into our head. But you can choose what you allow to set up camp in your mind. So if you have a sick thought that comes in your head, you can say, I reject this thought in the name of Jesus. Here's the thing. The devil can't read your mind. You know how you can pray to God just quietly in your mind, nobody has to hear it. The devil can't read your mind. If you want to resist the devil, you have to talk out loud. And a lot of people feel stupid doing that, so they won't do it. So they give in to the lies of the devil. They don't resist. Think about the things you resist in life. Resisting means you're willing to take a stand because something matters. If your peace and you're living a clean life and you're having a heart filled with love instead of hate and light instead of darkness, if that stuff matters to you, you need to be willing to fight for it. And what that means is, so this was the picture I found. So if you look at this picture, if you were coming up against them, which one would you be afraid of? The who? The lion? Okay. The lion, thank you. Okay, shh, come back. All right, so if you notice, the woman has a weapon, but her weapon pales in comparison. She has a weapon. He is a weapon. The part that we need to bring to it, as far as having our minds on the Lord instead of on a lot of the sick lies that the devil tells us, you can pray out loud and tell the devil, I guess you wouldn't call it praying if you're talking to the devil, but here's what I'm going to tell you. So I learned to do this. I used to get woken up in the middle of the night with horrible thoughts and hallucinations, and the devil tormented me. I couldn't sleep. I would shake all night sometimes. It was horrible. And through several things, one was I read a book called The Bondage Breaker, which God used to absolutely open my eyes to the whole spiritual warfare realm. Another was I went to counseling for a few months. And some of it was just, God helped me figure some things out about myself. But you can say, so when I started having these thoughts, here's what I would do. I would go in the bathroom in the middle of the night so I didn't wake my husband up. And you can say to the devil, you are defeated. I've been bought by the blood of the Lamb. I belong to Jesus Christ. You have no place in my heart. You have no place in my mind. And in the name of Jesus, I tell you to stop tormenting me. I heard a lot of messages about resisting the devil in my life, but nobody ever told me what to say. Like, what do you do? What do you do when you can't breathe and you're sweating and you're shaking and nothing's wrong? There were times I left a grocery cart full of food in the store and I just said to my husband, I couldn't stand to be in the store anymore. I just had to come home. Like, if you've never had a panic attack, be thankful and be sympathetic to the people who do. But we need to learn to stand up and fight for our peace and not just expect. Her part is resisting and saying, I reject what's coming against me, she's not going to do too much to fight it off on her own, though. She's hiding behind the one who has all the power. So this was the bottom line freeing thought for me. So sink in here, because this could be a life-changing thought. We have all the power in the world when we realize we have none of the power in the world. You hide behind the one who does. You tell the devil, he's got this, you're defeated. You start calling Jesus' name, read scripture out loud, listen to worship music. The devil doesn't want to be around that kind of stuff. And I can tell you, there was a moment in time at which I was freed from panic attacks, and I have not had one ever since. Once you know that you're believing lies, and you know how to handle it when the lies start, they stop. I have never had another panic attack. I used to have dozens a day. So I encourage you to be willing to fight for the peace of your mind. And now the whole thing about in Jesus' name, that only works if you're a believer. If you're not a believer, you're fighting the devil on your own power. So I guess you might have a bow and arrow, but you don't have a lion. This is an excerpt from the book that I mentioned that changed my life. Before we received Christ, we were slaves to sin. But because of Christ's work on the cross, sin's power over us has been broken. Satan has no right of ownership or authority over us. He is a defeated foe, but he's committed to keeping us from realizing that. He knows he can block your effectiveness as a Christian if he can deceive you into believing you're nothing but a product of your past, subject to sin, prone to failure, and controlled by your habits. And I'll tell you, there is a teen version of this book, The Bondage Breaker. I support their ministry, so I can buy books from them relatively cheap. If any of you promise me you will read it and you want a copy of that book and can't get it, I will get you a copy. Send me an email or stop in my room. But please don't do it if you're not. I do pay money for them, so don't take it unless you promise me you're going to read it. So I want to end with one last question, which is, how can Andy be in heaven when he did so many things wrong? And rather than me speaking for him, which I've done much of, I'm going to let him speak for himself. You're not going to hear his voice. If that's freaking you out, don't worry about it. But I have some things that he wrote as part of one of his inpatient treatments. Have any of you read The Cross and the Switchblade? Teen Challenge. Have you heard of Teen Challenge? It's a drug and alcohol rehab place. It's all over the country. It's a Christian place. And he actually got into that program and wrote answers to some questions. So I'm just going to ask you to be very quiet, and I'm going to slowly go through a couple of slides and let you read some things that he wrote, and then I'll have a finishing statement. The last thing I'd like to read is a poem that I wrote on Andy's birthday. 4 years. He was 22 when he died. He died on 2/22, just weird. But anyway, this was 3.5 years later. He would have been 26 today. I'd have invited him over for dinner, lasagna. After the family's off-key rendition of Happy Birthday, cake and ice cream. Then the gifts. Someone would have given him a shirt, something for hunting or fishing, maybe some cash. Thanks, Lise. Thanks, Tom. He'd have gone out on the porch and stared into the woods or up at the sky. Contemplation. Maybe he'd have taken my children out in the yard to run around. Catch me, Uncle Andy. Perhaps his little girl could have come too. Happy birthday, Daddy. What a simple yet unattainable image. My brother will never come to my house. I'll never cook dinner for him or have the joy of giving him another gift. He won't see his daughter grow up. She won't remember ever meeting him. My children will never meet their uncle this side of heaven. Who's that in the picture, Mommy? His budding young life was robbed of its hope and direction by his best friend and his worst enemy. The friendship began casually. They'd spend time together on weekends or when times got tough. Before he knew it, they were together all the time. Not by choice, but by necessity. Ironically, his companion became less and less comforting. It isolated him from others and even from himself. The bottle grew colder and colder. It turned on him and devoured him. Eventually, it killed him. Those of us who loved him are left with broken hearts and shattered dreams. Those who would have loved him as a daddy or an uncle are left with many questions and the missed experience of having known my brother, a very special person, my kind, sweet, funny brother, Andy. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to share this story this year. I thank you for all of the students who have been here to hear it. You know that there are people here who are playing with drugs and alcohol who shouldn't be. You know that there are people here who struggle with believing lies, whose minds are in torment. Lord, I just pray, and I even ask right now, as I do something a little unconventional at CAK, but nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that Jesus only wants followers who are willing to follow him when heads are bowed and eyes are closed. You tell us to be bold. You tell us to take a stand. When I think of the stories of people in the Bible, the friends who ripped open a roof to lower their friend because he needed a touch from Jesus, the bleeding woman who pushed her way through the crowd to get to you because she needed a touch. Lord, there are a lot of people here who need a touch. I pray that you would give them the courage to stand up right now, and it doesn't mean that they're an addict. It just means that they want a touch from you. And if they stand up, I'm going to ask the people around them to pray for them. So I'm asking you to be bold. If you need the Lord to touch you or someone in your family, or if you're concerned for your friends or your classmates, I just ask you to stand up. I'm not going to ask you to come forward. I'm just going to ask you to stand up. Be bold and take a stand. If you want Jesus, you have to be willing to ask. Lord, I pray that you would be with these students, help them to not believe the lies of the enemy. I pray that you would give them courage to stand and resist. I pray that if anybody has big plans for this weekend, or the upcoming weekends, or prom weekend, that involve things that shouldn't be involved, Lord, I pray that you would make them sick at the thought of this story. I pray that you would rescue our students, that they would not live like the world lives, that they would want you and clean living and love and light and peace, and be willing to turn their back on the lies of the devil. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.